Right. What are we wanting to cover? We want to. You want to. We want to talk about morality. We want to talk about our different perspectives on it, but also in a
Yeah,
way that it's not just within the clouds, philosophy, abstractness. It needs to be in the real world. And
yeah,
then why does one worldview allow that more than others? Not just if it's philosophically correct. Why can that be embodied? Yeah.
yeah. And sort of with a lot of morality, I think a lot of the literature and things it isn't applied, and I think it's quite interesting to more if you we'll talk about it, but say if you're basing our morals off any religious text or like anything bar sort of health and science, in my opinion, when you actually carry them out, what are the issues or the non-issues, I suppose, of doing so?
Right. Okay. When you say that, it sounds like there's this a strange like disconnect of there's this book that's sort of out there, just out there in the world, and then there's
Hmm.
us, and then it's
Yeah,
that. I'm trying to fit this in the frame, uh, and there's this weird, strange, perverse connection with that. It's like, oh, that's not right. That's what I'm sort of getting from your understanding. But when
okay.
whether it be Christianity, whether it be Islam, whether it be Judaism or some pagan belief,
Hmm.
there's always that leap of faith almost.
Yeah,
It's not just it's not like okay, we're just following this book. It's the faith in the whole process that reason in itself uh cannot find meaning, if that makes sense.
yeah. Your mic got a little bit quiet there, Josh. I did hear you, but
I'll move my
yeah,
mic a
I
bit
sort
closer.
of
Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. So we're if I've sort of tried to round what I'm sort of thinking about, I believe so. I'll say even with Christianity, when it was written with good intent, and it was written with good. Um, we want to make the world better, and this
When
is
Christianity was
how.
written,
Yes, well, in my idea, like when it was written, like when they made the first stories and they put them into the Bible essentially. But when it was first done, I believe that it was done with good intent. However, we all move on. Like this was written like 3, 4, 5 thousand years ago, and a lot has changed. Like in terms of morality, even in the past 15 years, our morals have changed quite a lot. And I think we do need to base our morality off something which does evolve constantly, like science. And if we can derive our morals from the well-being of humans, that is the way to have it ever changing as we aim to be more moral. And I think taking a book from several thousand years ago is like a snippet of the morals of that time.
can
It's like
So
I
writing,
essentially,
can I
let me just.
yeah,
yeah, go on, Ben.
just one, yeah, Ben.
So essentially, you're saying we should think in a way that is good for human beings against what is bad for human beings. So that's how we should derive our morality and what's good and what's wrong.
Yeah, but that can be derived from like facts about humans. But yes, essentially, it shouldn't be. We should take it from facts off, which are always under scrutiny, not
So you're
from
arguing we
necessarily.
should move towards something that can uh, be developed and can be changed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it can be forever improved or strive to be improved at least.
Okay, Ben, do you still have more to comment on that, or can I?
Um, well, it's interesting that you say we should, instead of rather looking at ancient texts to understand morality, we should just look at facts. We should just look at what's happening in the present, and then that will decide our morality. The only issue I have with that is you place a great deal of trust then in the present. You place a great deal of trust in understanding that, well, look, we'll just do what is good for who, like, for human beings, yeah, but you're, no matter what, how much good you do, you're always going to hurt someone, and no matter, and if you try and do something to the best of your ability, there's always going to be sin, there's always going to be evil. How do you, what's your solution to getting rid of that, if we're just to look at the present, and if we're just to constantly reevaluate, constantly re-educate, constantly be, well, hang on a minute, that didn't work yesterday, let's try something else today. Well, and then, but then when you find that sort of answer, do you write that down, and then do you go, okay, this works? Essentially, you're making laws then.
Yeah, well, essentially, because I think with taking the Bible and taking religious text, it has its place, and it does have good morals within it. However, to say that is the be-all and end-all of morality is wrong. It deserves to be scrutinized, and it has to withstand different things when they're saying, like, do not kill and things like that, or do not steal. These are good moral things to do. And they wrote that 2,000 years ago, so we do take them things, but I think as morality changes, like more recently, like especially with like the rise of sort of even transgender people or gay people and things, that we are only literally now being like, they actually need to be treated the same as everybody, and they need to be respected like they are real people, because we want to maximize well-being as much as we can. And I think
it doesn't say in the Bible to disrespect people. The Bible says very clearly to love your neighbor as you love yourself. You know, and like I said, like there's various parts in the Bible where you can take a kind of world view at it, like, okay, well, that's just downright out of hand. But when you put in a context, like in any book, you know, like in any book, if you're reading about, say, you're reading Lord of the Rings and you read a scary part about like a hobbit being killed or something, and then you're like, oh no, that's just awful. What am I meant to do now? You know, they're treating hobbits so bad. But then you look at the full story, you look at the full context, and actually you see this lore and this understanding of what actually, you know, the events that led to that. So back to my question though is, let's take your idea, Kyle, let's actually implement it in a laboratory setting, and let's say, okay, we are going to start morality from scratch. We're going to be like, okay, so we got the fundamentals, we got the foundation, do not kill, respect everyone, you know, blah blah blah. Okay, and then the next thing you know, in the community there's a fight. Okay, how do you resolve that? Using what basis? Using what understanding?
But on, say, with the case of, if morality becomes an actual science, we can begin to learn about it properly. It shouldn't be like a taboo subject. It's seen as religions dealt with that. It's more in the case of like from the Quran, and they're like, kill thine own follower and things, then it leads into like real catastrophes like 9/11 and things, or like they executed 70 Christians a few weeks ago. Like, it leads in that when you're taking the literal word of the text as this is right and this is wrong, and it can't be scrutinized. In the terms of like, if a fight breaks out, we want peace, which we strive for peace, which is the ultimate way to, like, conflict resolution is the way to maximize well-being, and that, which is,
well, what makes your idea of peace more? So let's take you and a Muslim, for example, and a Muslim's idea of peace and your idea of peace
are two different things.
What makes your idea better?
But you can,
like,
accept
how would you
both.
convince this other person?
But you can accept both, and that's great. There can be multiple ways to be moral. There's multiple ways to be good. That's like, to me, morality, you can treat it like health almost a little bit, in the way there's no way to be healthy one way. There's no one ultimate diet. There's multiple healthy diets. There's many. There's multiple ways to be more maximize well-being and be moral. And I think, in a way, with Christianity, a lot of it is moral and a lot of it is good, but some bits aren't. And I think if we actually treat of just be a good person, and don't harm, and it doesn't matter really where you directly get it from, but I just argue that it's not really an attack on Christianity, it's more the taking of your morals from ancient texts rather than morals of like what is wrong, like say today, even with like women in work, like it was only a short time ago they couldn't work or they didn't vote and stuff, and that's only in the past 100 years. So how do we take morality from 2,000 years ago, if at like an underestimate, how do we base our morality of that versus what our current knowledge is? Like, I think people of 2,000 years ago had an extremely closed mind compared to what we know today. Like, oh, yeah, Alexa went. But they had quite a closed mind compared to what we have today. Like, they didn't know America existed, for instance, until 500 years ago. Like, that's baffling that they didn't know that. So how would they know how to actually be ultimately moral when they didn't even know like America existed? They didn't know anything about medicine properly. There was no vaccines. They didn't have proper practicing like hospitals the same way they do
But
today.
you're putting
Like,
that in
okay.
the same scope of the same scope you can see through. Scientific progress has no correlation with morality.
but it can't,
Economic
why not?
well-being has no correlation with morality. A poor man could be be more moral than a rich man.
Oh, of course.
A smarter person can be more immoral than a stupid person.
Yeah, yeah. I agree.
If you take a university course in science, something related to science, you're are no better equipped to be moral.
Oh no, I don't believe that you are.
But you've given examples
How?
of technological progress, okay, and progress in mapping geography, and you're equating that to, well, if they didn't have as much progress then how can we expect they had as much progress with morality? But there's no comparison.
But I'm proposing that science can be used to strive towards getting better at morality and understanding what's good and bad more.
Okay,
Like
I have just
I see it as a progression. Like I think, sorry Ben, just before, it's like I see it's like a snippet of 2,000 years ago, that text. It's the same way if they have a snippet of right now and look at it in 2 or 3,000 years, they'll be appalled at what we're doing now, but at least we can progress towards better.
Can I give a scientific example of that would sort of press against your point?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay, so got the idea of rats. Okay, say you got a lab
Yeah.
rat. Okay, I watched a video about this not too long ago. Say you got a lab rat. It's been brought up in a perfect environment, completely a safe environment for this rat. There's no predators, there's no dangerous thing. It gets watered, fed, all its rat friends, happy days. It's a happy rat, it's a calm rat, and it seems to be, this rat is having a good life, okay? Has no experience of any predator or anything that would harm it whatsoever. But
Yeah.
they what they did was they wafted cat odor into it. Still no predator. Okay, no predator.
Yeah.
Just the odor of a cat. They wafted in cat odor into the rat cage. That rat, because it must be in its genetic programming, must be a part of its very being to be a rat, is to also be scared of cat odor, and that's part of the identity of a rat. It's not a learned fear. It's part of its identity.
I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah, it's genetic.
And
It's part of its phenotype.
it could do what it does after it's scared. It explore its cage. Oh, is there a thing to be scared about? And only once it's explored everything about the cage, it can maybe start to not be as scared. But there's still that, at least that initial fear that was just part of its very being, identity of being a rat. Okay. And so say if we extrapolate from that, there's this archetypal idea of a predator that exists as part of your very being, even if it doesn't exist in the world anymore. Say if you have a perfect predator-free life, there still exists in your very being the makeup of a predator, danger. right? Unexplored territory, all that stuff. So I wouldn't be so quick to assume that our ancient forefathers, our ancestors, I wouldn't be so quick to assume that they have no say in this matter if they still have there. We can definitively say there are certain aspects of our identity that are inherent to our very identity. Okay, that is true, and these are the things we see value. That's how we develop our value structures. That's how we develop our moral systems. That's how we have our intuitions and our religious ideas. They're all from our very identity of seeing and categorizing the world. Okay, that's everyone throughout all of human history has access to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Why would you be so quick to discredit these stories that have lasted thousands of years from word of mouth and just the ideas existing? They haven't. No, they're the most refined. By definition, they're the most refined ideas of mankind because they have
Passed the test of time.
They've passed the test of time. They exist. Why do we have them? What do they mean? Like, that's this discussion for another time, right? But I wouldn't discredit these texts from the basis they're not from a technologically advanced civilization. They still have the idea of there's predators. Do you know what I mean? And
Yes,
that's part of their being.
I kind of like, I get what you're saying. However, I mean that things have evolved. Like, as you said, they're ancient. Things have evolved since. There's good in them, but not. You don't need to take it as.
But have we fundamentally changed our identity of what a human is? I don't think so.
But we have completely. But then, why? But our morals have changed so much since then, like so much, and like what we think's right and wrong and things. So why is
but
it
my
not allowed
my
to
point
adapt?
is my point is they haven't changed at all from the basis of from what they're based on, which is these archetypal
But
narratives that are just part of our identity. They haven't changed.
But how have they? So why? Because where you're kind of losing me. Why is it like things from like say women learn being able to vote? Why were they not allowed to vote from the start? It's immoral to say that they can't. They're also humans. We're equal. But why was that?
Well,
not
I'd say
implemented?
I'd say
If
we
haven't
have
changed that much, it should
I'd
have
say
been
we
like
have
that
a
from
very
day one.
specific view on history. Because it's easy to look back and say, right, the women didn't have the vote of this until this recent date, okay? And it's like, oh, well, only women must be oppressed back then. It's like, hold on a minute. I'm pretty sure everyone had a bad time. Do you know what I mean? It's
Everyone's
not,
oppressed in different ways. Yeah, I agree.
everyone had a horrific time, and then all of a sudden we have, like, absolute abundance.
But
okay,
now
and then we're
getting
riding
better.
that wave.
Yeah, and we're getting better. Like we're getting more moral, quite exponentially at the minute.
And that it
argue.
allows us to do different things, and things like tampons and birth control have completely revolutionized what women can do in a society.
Yeah, but
And that's not even necessarily just from a. It's like they can it's actually possible for them to do something that's not related to raising kids.
yeah.
Maybe
but what I'm
we
trying to
shouldn't
say,
discourage that raising kids,
We-
but you need
You're
to
almost
take
like
these you need to put these into your model is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's what I think. Going back to like the rap thing, which is kind of if you take that as any behavior, you have an instinct, you have genetics, you're made up of genes, and we genetically have not changed that much since then. We haven't. We are still humans at the end of the day, so that hasn't changed massive amounts, which is kind of what you're saying. However, our knowledge of how to maximize well-being has changed exponentially, and we have to bring our morals with it.
Okay, I was reading this. There's there's this book here, right? Can you see the title? Notes from Underground. Yeah, Dostoevsky. It is an incredible book, and it's blows your minds, and it's a fiction book. Do you mind if I read a couple pages of it? Because I think he kind of sums up. You know.
You can read it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In fact, if one day they really found a formula for all our desires and whims, that is to say, what they depend on, what laws determine their origin, and what way they spread, what they aim at in different situations, and so on and so forth. In other words, the precise mathematical formula, well, human beings will probably cease immediately to have desires, or rather, I suppose, will certainly cease to have them. Why should one want to desire according to a formula? Not only that, this would immediately turn man into an organ stop, or something like that, because what is man without wishes, without will, and without desires, but a stop knob on an organ pipe? What do you think? Let's look at the probabilities. Could it happen, or not? You say, trying to make up your mind. Our desires will, for the most part, be mistaken as a result of mistaken view of our advantages. The reason we sometimes desire pure nonsense is precisely because we, in our stupidity, see that nonsense the easiest way to achieve what we have decided beforehand is to our advantage. Well, when all this has been explained and calculated on a piece of paper, which is very possible because it is abominable and senseless to believe beforehand that there are some laws of nature that human beings will never discover, then of course there will no longer be any so-called wishes. For if desire were ever to become identical with rational judgment, we'd then start rationalizing rather than desiring, because we can't, for example, while keeping our moral judgment, at that same time desire something nonsensical, and thus deliberately go against our rational judgment in wishing for something which might do us harm. I'm going to skip a decent way into this.
Yeah, what's the title of this book?
Notes from Underground. Now I ask you, what can you expect of a man who is a creature with such strange qualities? Cover him with all the good things of the world, drown him in happiness right over the top of his head, so that only little bubbles appear on the surface of that happiness, as they do in water. Give him such material riches that there will be nothing left for him to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with making sure the world history goes on forever. And then, even then, out of sheer ingratitude and a desire to slander you, he will commit some nastiness. He puts even the little cakes at risk and will deliberately express a desire for the most pernicious nonsense, for the most counterproductive absurdity, for the sole purpose of adulterating all this positive reasonableness which, with his own perniciousness. Fantastic element. In fact, it is precisely his fantastic dreams, his exceedingly vulgar stupidity, that he wants to preserve, just in order to confirm for himself, as if it mattered, that humans are still humans and not piano keys, on which the laws of nature themselves, with their own hands and threaten to go on playing until it would be impossible to desire anything not laid out down in mathematical tables. And that's not all. If he ever really turned out to be a piano key, and even if you could prove it to him mathematically and by natural science, even then he won't become reasonable, but on the contrary, will deliberately do something purely out of sheer ingratitude, really just to have his own way. And should he turn out not to have sufficient means to do it, he will invent destruction and chaos, devise various torments, and end up getting his own way. He will lay a curse upon the whole world, and since man alone can curse, it's his privilege, which more than anything else distinguishes him from animals, he will probably get his way by his curse alone. He will really convince people that he's a human being and not a piano key. If you say that this too, the chaos, the darkness, and the cursing can be calculated by means of a table, so that the mere possibility of a preliminary calculation will stop everything and rational judgment will come into its own. In this case, man will deliberately make himself mad so as to not have rational judgment, but to have his own way. I believe in this. I guarantee that this is so. For the whole business of a human being really does entirely consist of man proving to himself every minute of the day that he is a human being and not an organ stop. Even at some cost to himself, he'll be trying to prove it. He'll be trying to prove it, even if it means becoming a caveman again. How can you, after all, resist the temptation to congratulate him on the fact that all this has not yet come about, and that desire still depends on the devil knows what? You're shouting at me, if you still consider me worth shouting to, that nobody in this instance is depriving me of my will. They're only trying to arrange things so that my will would, by its own will, coincide with the normal interests and laws of nature and arithmetic. Ah, gentlemen, what kind of will can there be when that little table and arithmetic are involved, when the only thing that is acceptable is twice two is four without your will? So that's what your will amounts to. It's a bit lengthy, but
No, that's...
does that make
No,
sense?
I do.
Because you've
Yeah,
got this
kind of,
idea
it's
of.
quite-
I'd encourage you to actually read the book because it's incredible.
Yeah,
I probably butchered it as well. You've got this idea of we've got facts that we know improve human well-being. You know, we've got ideas of economic growth. Maybe you should have a decent amount of money, and then that's you won't be scared for the debt collector. We'd have sufficient food. All these things. Roof over your head. All these things. But the thing is, the thing that makes man is not. It's nothing to do with these things, if that makes sense.
But I don't like when we're saying what makes man and things like that, in the sense of we are no different than any other animal, in the sense of we're not special. We have just got to the point where we can really influence the full planet, and that's what, if you want to put the context of what we're special in that way, we're relatively unique.
So Kyle, I was going to ask you a question. Do you think then, if we're not special per se, you're a great advocate for peace and for good. You strike me as somebody like that, and that to me is special. There is no other Kyle Morrison. There's only you. You can only be you. That in its sense is it's unique, and it's a lot more rare than any Joe. It's a personality. It's who you are. So if you apply that then to every person you see, every person is trying to do the best they can. Why then? My question is, do you think then the world's gone wrong somehow?
Oh, I wouldn't say wrong. I wouldn't say it's wrong. It's created, like, evolution has created this. If I don't mean it the way it'll come out, but this beast in man, as humans, that we've actually been able to. We're the only species to the extent that we do it. So we come from like the savannah originally, but we create grassland everywhere we go. We can truly manipulate every environment, and it's impacted the world so much. We created agriculture. There was a book called Sapiens. I've got the second one there. I don't know where the first one is. And it goes through how people became people as they are today, and it goes through sort of being the hunter-gatherers, and then we became, like, once we actually got agriculture, and how our actual health dropped when we first got agriculture, because you became doing like very monotonous tasks compared to what you would have done before. But how we've created this beast in man that can really, really influence the world, and I wouldn't say it went wrong, because it happened, but there's a debate to be had that it's good that it happened or not. It hasn't been good for everything else, because we are predators of animals, and it's not good.
Evil exists. But evil exists, yes.
Yeah.
So why are we in such? If good and evil exist in this world, for example, if evil exists in this world just as much as good, why are we in such opposite reaction to evil? Why are we so against evil if we started out moralless? If we are no different than the animals, how can we, in a scientific perspective, how can we run experiments on morality when we could never separate ourselves from it? I'm going back to what you said about going to like having a more modern take on morality, but it just isn't possible because we can't actually, just the way if we were all from a different country, we would be speaking in a different language. We could be talking about the same thing, but it'll be a completely different language.
Yeah.
We can't assess, we can't become sort of self-aware. We can't extract ourselves from good and evil. Just like C.S. Lewis says, how can I know what a squiggly line is? I can only know it's a squiggly line if I have an idea of what straight is. A man feels wet when he falls into water, right? But a fish wouldn't feel wet because it is in that water. What you're saying to me and what I'm hearing is because we live in this natural world, we shouldn't react against it. If we're part of this world, heart, soul, our personalities, if it's all part of this world, how are we in such reaction against what's happening in it? How can we know anything else that's beyond it if it's all just made inside it, if you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but then to me, we understand what harms and what helps. So like us understanding that, like in a different, can animals sin? None. Can animals do sin?
But even
I think sin is related to the capacity.
Like how
is sin is to be able to sin
Sorry,
is
Josh,
about the capacity to choose. We wouldn't say that. Essentially, they're not conscious enough to choose, if that makes sense.
But your dog, for instance, knows what's right and wrong, so they have choice. So that can they sin?
But
that
really
is through lessons like we've all been like.
Here we only say
my dog.
We only determine who's a good boy and who's a bad dog, right? We'd be right. So the thing that makes a dog good is basically an equation of how much exposure has he had with humans. The more exposure it's had with humans, the more it sort of mimics us, and we're like, that's a good boy there, right? But if we take
but then what about
wolf,
like chimps, which have
well, I'd say dogs are particularly,
or like a wolf. Then
a dog would be a particularly specific example, just because they have been systematically bred to be with humans for who knows how many generations.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
That's just a very specific example. I'd be hard pressed to find another.
Okay, but you said the wolf, for instance. So can a wolf, can it sin?
No.
There's a litter of pups and they bully like the runt of the litter and kill it. Like that's pretty brutal, but then that's not sin.
Yeah,
it's not sin because a dog doesn't have the capacity to sin. You will not say you'll not say a wolf sinned against me. You'll say a wolf, attacked me. What Josh said about dogs being, with humans, it's only because we only determine what a good boy is. A dog doesn't know it's a good boy unless it's told it's a good boy. The same way humans only know they're being good.
But then, but chimps can't sin. Then, like chimpanzees or like higher level primates and all themselves.
No, we would probably limit to humans.
But can I just going back to
what are you saying, Ben?
To what? Sorry, just to keep going down this. Just
to put us back there into what I said. I love so much your scientific mind in terms of how we can derive morality in a present sense. How we can. Okay, there was a time where, ancient times, we got that fixed, and Josh had a very good explanation about, how it's been passed down. It stood the test of time. So, yes, we can understand now that our forefathers' voices are just as important now because they have done through that test of time, because they sort of passed that test, okay? You're saying it's time for a new sort of voice. It's time for a new
where's the test? I mean, if we haven't been able to scrutinize it, it hasn't went through a test.
Well, let's say,
Okay,
Kyle,
can I
you
can I
write.
give you what I
Let's say,
mean
Kyle,
by
you write about the body.
the delay does not help this. So,
Sorry, hello.
hello, can you hear
Yeah, it
us?
doesn't.
It doesn't help. When I say it's
Hello,
stood
I
the
can hear
test,
you. Yeah.
when I say it's stood the test of time, we mean people have found value in the stories. That's why they tell. Only the stories that people find most valuable get told. You know, if there's a movie and it's a bad movie, I'm not going to tell my friends go see the movie.
Yeah, like
The movie's going to die out, and you know, if there's a good movie, I'm going to tell that story. You know,
There's
take
an
these
evolutionary
ideas.
benefit to.
It's like an evolution of story, I suppose. Yeah, to use your scientific.
Yeah, but there's an evolutionary benefit to having religion in terms of it doesn't make it in my eyes true.
I suppose so. But what the
And
thing
where
I'm,
we've kind of
this delays off.
from a previous, yeah, it's quite because and just before, because I would need to go in a few minutes
Yeah.
here. Just there's the point of because we're kind of open like a new door about where I was trying to go with if the dog or the wolf can't sin and we can sin, but chimpanzees can't sin. What was the first animal able to sin?
So I'm going to cut in here. I may have completely and utterly overloaded my CPU on my laptop. Having 82 tabs open may do that, and having recording software for both visual and audio separate, and having your code that's unrelated to the process in the background and all that stuff. Maybe it doesn't help things, but I completely overloaded my CPU. If you're watching this on YouTube, maybe you could tell that there's about 20 frames for the whole video. That's because of that as well, but the last 10 minutes or so of the recording got cut off. Not too bad. We were kind of wrapping things up. We were trying to basically make some notes to the future of what we disagree with still and what we should talk about and explore in the future. So I'll just list those points. So Kyle still wants to talk about, you know, where at what point are we conscious from like an evolutionary kind of standpoint where you're abstractly looking upon this line, you know, where are we conscious? I still want to press on how that's the wrong way of looking at it, because it denies being conscious, because we can't look at an abstract line and it's an unfruitful question. And also I want to press on the idea from his perspective of this utilitarian kind of morality system where, you know, it's basically positive emotion and a lack of negative emotion is just the metric for success. And I want to push against that idea, because I gave an example of in science, our brain is wired to reach an equilibrium. So there could be a high, but there will reach equilibrium, and you could be in a bad situation, but it will reach equilibrium given enough time. And that's for example, when you get hit of cocaine, you're high emotion, right? But then it stabilizes, and maybe it goes too far in the direction because you don't have that cocaine anymore, and that's why you need to keep on taking hits of cocaine, and that's how addiction happens, and that's how you're dependent just to reach equilibrium. Okay, and I pressed on the idea of if the idea of the metric for success is just people feeling good, that in itself doesn't really stand any test of time, because it'll just reach equilibrium, and what's really be done at the end of the day. So the thing I want to further discuss is the idea I brought up when I was talking about notes from underground. You can give people abundance, economic abundance, give them all these things that should make them happy, for, you know, make them have high emotion, positive emotion, and lack of negative emotion, or all that kind of stuff, but it denies what makes humans human. It's not meaningful. Just because something makes you feel good doesn't make it meaningful, and I make the point that the struggles of life, it sounds paradoxical, but the struggles of life make life bearable to an extent. Yes, I'm not advocating absolute suffering, but suffering plays a role, and this links back to the idea of faith, because faith is not abstract philosophy and abstract theology that you can't really apply in your life. Faith is when it's applied, and faith implies a struggle. It implies a jump. It implies that reason can only take you so far. Kierkegaard, I think, said something that was like, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. I think that's what he said. It's like reason can only take us so far, and then when you take a jump, when we act into the world, and that's when faith comes in. And if you relate it back to Christianity, Israel, the people of God, Israel means to struggle with God, to wrestle with God, to fight with God, it's just struggle, it's battle with faith. And maybe that's what it means to know God. It's part of that struggle. Maybe humans don't, maybe we don't. Maybe the thing that makes life worth living is the constant struggle. Which is obviously more nuanced than just having a strange utilitarian criteria of success. But we will discuss these things in the future. Another thing that was cut out, Kyle is going to Australia in 2 weeks' time, as of recording. So about 2 weeks' time to start his PhD studies on meta-analysis, Bayesian statistics, probabilities, zoology, all that sort of fun stuff in Australia. So we'd like to wish him the best for that. But we should hopefully get another conversation. Hopefully I'll cut back on the amount of internet browsing tabs I've got open. I'll close my other programs. Hopefully it'll be back to normal like all the other recordings. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. But Kyle should be back. Anyway, thank you for watching.